Hello class, my name is Saria, and this week we're going to be discussing multicultural education. So what is our objective? Well, this presentation is designed to identify what multicultural education is and also define what is meant by privilege versus marginalization. So let's define multicultural education. This is a process of comprehensive school reform and a basic education for all students. Multicultural education challenges and rejects racism and other forms of discrimination in schools and society. It accepts and affirms the pluralism that students, their communities, and their teachers reflect, and this would include ethnic, racial, linguistic, religious, economic, gender, and so forth. Multicultural education definition has 7 basic characteristics. They are inter-racist education, basic education, important for all students, pervasive, education for social justice, a process, and critical pedagogy. We will now examine each one of these 7 characteristics in detail. The first characteristic in defining what multicultural education is that it is an anti-racist education. That means it is anti-discriminatory. It doesn't discriminate against anyone. It must be conscientiously anti-racist, meaning being mindful of how some are favored over others in school policies and practices. This is included in the curriculum, the choice of materials, the sorting policies, to teachers' interactions and relationships with not only the students but also their families. It means to work affirmatively to combat racism. Anti-racist education means that we are working actively for social justice, and this active working for social justice is not just your business, my business, his business, her business, but it is everybody's business. The second step, or the second characteristic in multicultural education definition, is that it is basic education. Multicultural literacy is indispensable for living in today's world. It must not be preferable or canon. That means it cannot be just one-sided, and one cannot just assume that all the knowledge that is out there that is most beneficial is already in place. It has to be inclusive, all inclusive. I capitalized the word all to show that all the important or prominent participants in history should be included. It should expect all students to be fluent in a language other than their own, be aware of literature and arts of many different peoples, and be conversant with the history and geography, not just here in the United States, but of the entire world. A third characteristic of multicultural education is that it is important for all students' education. Now, all students are miseducated to the extent that they receive only a partial or biased education. However, multicultural education must be inclusive. It has to be about the people and for all the people. And it has to cover ethnicity, ability, social class, language, sexual orientation, religion, gender, race, and any other differences. The fourth characteristic is that multicultural education is pervasive. It permeates everything. It includes the school climate, the physical environment, and the curriculum and relationships amongst the students and the teachers and the community. It has to be apparent in every lesson, whether it's on the playground, whether it's in gym class, whether it's in music or history class. It has to be apparent everywhere. Being pervasive means that it's a philosophy and a way of looking at the world. A fifth characteristic of multicultural education is that it's education for social justice. Social justice, this invites students and teachers to put their learning into action for social justice. It means they have to be conscientious of what is fair and what is unfair. And they have to welcome and plan actively for social discussions that focus on social justice. The sixth characteristic of multicultural education is that multicultural education is a process. It's ongoing and dynamic. One knows that knowledge is never complete and there's no established canon set in stone. If things need to be added, things get added. It can change. It's revolving. It primarily involves relationships among people, recognizing that sensitivity and understanding are more crucial in promoting student learning. And in such a way, this process redefines the teacher's roles, in which the teachers become empowered teachers, and in turn, empowered teachers can empower their students, and will have empowered teachers and empowered students. The seventh and final characteristic of multicultural education is that multicultural education is critical pedagogy. Every educational decision reflects upon the decision maker. It can be negative or positive, but it reflects the decision maker. These decisions have impact on the lives and experiences of our students, and we want to help the students to develop decision making and social action skills. We would want to acknowledge rather than suppress cultural and linguistic diversity. This does not mean substituting one view over the other. Rather, it would be reflecting on multiple and contradictory perspectives to understand reality more fully. And in doing so, we will also explore any myths or falsehoods. Okay, moving along now, we're going to talk a little bit about privilege versus marginalization. Now, what does it mean to be privileged? A privileged person is defined as somebody who have unearned assets that create and provide a constant stream of opportunities denied upon others in societies. So the privileged are people that simply have their status because of who they happen to be. The article talks about white privilege, which is like an invisible package of unearned assets that members of dominant culture can cash in upon on a daily basis. This basically confers dominance and permission to control by virtue of one's race, social class, ability, sex, ability, status, and sexual orientation. This allows the dominant cultural individuals to decide which groups can be accepted and are permitted by them to acculturate in their lifestyle, in their culture. Now, marginalization, on the other hand, is when groups in the society are oppressed or pushed down based on their cultural characteristics that are deemed unacceptable by dominant culture, which would be the privilege. This would include ethnocentrism, racism, classism, sexism, heterosexism, and ableism. And this marginalization would be dependent upon the wishes of the dominant culture to determine when or how an acculturated person will be able to reap rewards. And total assimilation may be unattainable because it requires that they be fully accepted as equals by the dominant culture members, and this usually is not acceptable to the dominant culture members or the privileged. Okay, to sum up in conclusion, multicultural education is a way of rethinking school reform. It transforms and enriches schools of all the young people. It takes into account the cultures. It's basically simply good pedagogy, and it's a more effective education for changing the world. Marginalization and minority status happens when the privileged ones oppress groups in society based on the cultural characteristics that are deemed unacceptable by dominant culture. Thank you so much for your time and attention in this presentation. The discussion questions will be posted in the classroom under discussions.